And since this is sponsored by Catholic social teaching, I thought, how better than with you to just talk about and trace this journey with religious people of faith and the relationship of religion and the death penalty. And how can you have all these people who supposedly say they, quote, follow Jesus, who said you got to love your enemies. All the deep spiritual traditions know that we are one, brothers and sisters. And killing an enemy means that you turn a switch and say love everybody but not him, because he did this act and we can kill him. In fact, we have to kill him in order for us to be safe. What happened to Christianity along the way? And the book I'm writing now is called River of Fire, The Spiritual Journey to Death Row. And I begin in the execution chamber with Patrick Saunier. That's the story of Dead Man Walking, first man in the book, first one I wrote to, first one whose death I experienced by electrocution. And it goes something like this, the prologue of the book. They killed a man with fire one night, strapped him in an oaken chair, and pumped electricity through his body. I was there, and I saw. Told him to look at my face when they killed him there. His death was legal. The Supreme Court had said it was legal. He had killed, and so we killed him. And I came out of the execution chamber that night. In the dark, it was at midnight. There were no religious leaders there to protest the killing. But I was there, and I was a witness. And I then began to know. I think where I go next is, and now I will take you through the spiritual journey that led me to the killing chamber that night. In the Catholic Church, which is in many ways not different from other Christian churches, when Pat was executed in 1984, I began to work then. I knew my mission. I had seen it, what it means to kill a human being, knew his crime, horrible crime, innocent teenage kids have been killed, knew the horror of that. I knew the way, I had a great editor in writing Dead Man Walking. And he was Jason Epstein. He was at Random House in New York, and he said, Helen, you're a Catholic nun, you're a spiritual advisor to a man on death row. Nobody's going to read this book if in the first 10 pages of this book you don't look unblinkingly at the crime and be horrified at it, because they're going to think you're naive, you're out of touch, you're a nun, you're the guy's spiritual advisor, he's a child of God, he murdered somebody, but child of God, he didn't mean it. And to be credible, you got to take people over into both parts of this journey. And part of it is the crime, first 10 pages, you unblinkingly to take people there. And he was invaluable to me. You know, William Faulkner, when he got the Nobel Prize for Literature, in his speech at the Nobel event, said, the only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself. And so when I began working in the 80s after coming out, I had no mandate from anybody. And the teaching of the Catholic Church was like many Christian churches. There were documents that the bishops had ordered or issued, but it was all on paper. All the people in the pew were saying, fry them. And there was a time in the 80s where the poll, devastating, showed the more people went to church, the more they were for the death penalty. Now that's sad. The more you go to church, the more you're for. So what's going on with religion? How did religion get so commandeered? How did it get so co-opted? How did the gospel of Jesus about loving your enemy that Gandhi understood, and that anybody who's got deep spiritual sensitivities knows that we can never take people and say you're the enemy and kill them. How did it happen? So in my own church, my Catholic church, we had an archbishop, and I love the guy. He was a really sweet guy, but he had been in the military. He blocked the Louisiana bishops from issuing any strong statement against the death penalty because he believed we needed the death penalty. And this is before 9/11, this is before terrorists, but he had been in the military. And he said that's the language, some of these people, the only language they understand. And so I have my own Catholic archbishop in New Orleans. And one time he had me on his TV program. And he goes, "Sister, where are you getting these ideas about it?" I said, "Well, Archbishop, the gospel, the gospel." And look what happens. So enter into this picture the Catholic district attorney in New Orleans. You know, everybody in that cat is Catholic. The Catholic DA in New Orleans is Harry Connick Sr. His son, Harry Connick Jr., does great music. His daddy's going for the death penalty with gusto and quoting the teachings of the Catholic Church to back him up. And into this scene, those troublesome Jesuits. I don't know one for sure sitting in here with us, and there are probably others. They may be disguised, but you know they're here. Harry Connick, the Jesuits from Loyola University, see, when you come to the sentencing part of a trial where the jurors, just ordinary folks like us, are now going to decide if the person lives or dies, right? They each hold that person's life in their hands because you have to have a unanimous verdict to vote for death. So it comes down to it that if any one of those jurors doesn't vote for death, the person's going to live. So they each hold the life of the person in their hands, and they're asked to decide if your fellow human being is put to death or not. So the Jesuits were coming in, they were giving testimony during the sentencing part of the trial, and saying to the people, a lot of whom were Catholic, they read the bishop's statement of the United States. It wasn't the strongest statement in the world, but clearly the bent of it was not to uphold the death penalty. And they said, this is what the Catholic bishops are saying. Well, Harry Connick Sr. was so incensed over this, he goes to his buddy, his friend, Archbishop Hannon, and he says, "Archbishop, you know what those Jesuits from Loyola are doing? They actually come into the trials, and these jurors are voting for life for these people. You got to do something, Archbishop. So I need you to write a letter. So, because in your jurisdiction, Archbishop Hannon, aren't you the spiritual leader? Not the Jesuits. You're the Archbishop in the New Orleans Archdiocese, and in your jurisdiction." The bishop said, "Absolutely, I'll write a letter." And he wrote a letter. "Dear Catholic jurors, in good conscience, you can vote for death. It's a traditional teaching of the church. And at murder trials, Harry Connick Sr. would read the letter from the Archbishop to the Catholic jurors and getting the Jesuits booted off so that they couldn't be doing that damage, those Jesuits." It's an amazing thing. I mean, you ever heard of the book Death Comes to the Archbishop? Well, this is Death Comes from the Archbishop. And it's all written up there in Dead Man Walking, because I would meet with the Archbishop. He's blocking the bishops from taking a strong stand. But when Patrick Sonnier was executed, I called up the bishop and I said, "Bishop, would you write a letter? Would you go see the governor? Would you write a letter? Would you be a voice at the pardon board hearing?" He said, "Sure." It's like he didn't want real people to die, right? But yet he's upholding the policy in which people die. And that was the beginning. That's how I got involved. And I was going, wow, nothing is as it appears to be here. But I knew this. See, if you've witnessed something, then you know what you got to do. And you cannot walk away from an injustice and a thing that your eyes have seen. I mean, that's what galvanizes us, to have a passion for justice. And I knew what I needed to do. So in this road, along the way, the first people who were my teachers was Amnesty International, who taught me about human rights, that human rights, the right not to be tortured, the right not to be killed, is an inalienable human right. And that's why when Eleanor Roosevelt worked for the UN Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and Article 3, everyone has a right to life. The debate begins. They said we got to make exceptions, except those legitimately by government sentenced to death. And Eleanor Roosevelt says, no, no. We want to uphold a universal declaration of human rights. No one should be killed. Everyone has the right to life. Article 5. No one should be subjected to cruel and degrading punishment and torture. Human rights, inalienable, which means that governments don't give human rights to people for good behavior or take them away for bad behavior. Governments cannot have that kind of power over human rights. And so we've seen 40 years ago, 25 nations in the world didn't have the death penalty. And now out of the 192, over half of them have abolished the death penalty. And it has everything to do with understanding about human rights. We may have different approaches to faith or whether or not we ever step inside a church or synagogue, but human rights is the common path in which we can all take together. But the journey with my Catholic Church continues. So after this roaring start with the Archbishop in New Orleans, but beginning to educate the people, knowing you got to get to the people in the pews. It was great for the religious leaders to issue these statements, but if you're not educating the people in the pews, well, guess what? On this issue, on this moral issue, controversy follows you like a hungry dog, because we're not talking about innocent human life here. You're talking about people who've crossed the line and done an unbelievably, sometimes terrible crime. And so what can we do with them? And you got to deal with outrage. You have to deal with controversy. Because, hey, isn't this a law? Isn't this what the Supreme Court said? And before I awakened, I used to think if the Supreme Court of the United States said something, or if we had the best court system in the world, I never dreamed that innocent people could get caught in this process. And actually, innocent people could be condemned to death or even killed. I had no idea, because I came from privilege. I came from a successful lawyer daddy and resources all over the place, and I thought anybody could get anything done when you just pull the forces together to go get it done. I didn't know what happened to you. If you're poor and you got a court-appointed attorney who's paid $1,000 at most for the cases in Louisiana, you know what the test is? Do you have a lawyer in Louisiana for many years? They put a mirror under the nose of the lawyer. And if you see a little condensation of humidity going on in the mirror, he's breathing, you got a lawyer. You could have a lawyer on drugs. You could have a lawyer sleeping through your trial. You could have a lawyer who does nothing for mitigation in your case. Death sentence, death sentence, death sentence. Joe Cannon, they loved. The judges would appoint him in Texas. They knew he'd deliver a death sentence for them because there was no defense. Courts are about an adversarial way of coming to truth. Prosecution presents, defense presents. You've got nobody by your side to access your constitutional protections. You're going to die. And if you walk out of a courtroom and you've been sentenced to death, then second revelation about the law for me, I thought, well, that's what all those appeals courts, they have a lot of those appeals courts. Plenty of people saying they got too many of those appeals courts. And that's why we can't get the executions. That's why Rink was storming around in the Supreme Court building. Bring it on. Get on with these executions. Grease the wheels. Why aren't we getting more executions? It's the kind of legal machinery we set up. Look at you in California. 700 people on death row, and you execute people every 20 years. What's the deal? Who's putting all those people on death row? What are they getting out of this? We have to understand the text and the subtext of what's going on here. But religion, my own faith, believing in Jesus, and people don't want to get involved in controversy. I'm finding out that people in the pulpit, they'd be glad to talk about some of the pro-life issues, the innocent ones, okay, not against that, that's fine. But boy, they don't want to touch the death penalty with a 10-foot pole because there's contribution and the daggone contributions drop off. You do too much of that stuff, they're going to stop putting those envelopes in the baskets. And people are going to be upset. They're going to be upset. What you doing bringing politics into our church? The death penalty. I still get ask that question. What's a nun doing involved in politics? I used to think, well, I'm spiritual. I'm above the political. I just do the spiritual thing, you know. And I learned, if you don't raise a finger, if you don't raise your voice against something that's wrong in your society, we're upholding the status quo, and that's a very political position to take. So I began to learn, I can't be neutral. I've seen what I've seen, and I got to get out to the people and do this. And so working with people in churches. There is an organization here in California, People of Faith Against the Death Penalty. 1,000 churches. Anybody in here is a person of faith. Don't leave this room, please, without becoming a part of that. And just so I don't forget to tell you this, but on November 30th, this little community of lay people in Rome, community of Sant'Egidio, organized this around the world to have Cities for Life on November 30th. It's in Tuscany, little bitty country, first one to abolish the death penalty. And cities, it's called Cities for Life, and you light up a structure in your city. Here in San Francisco, it'll be the cathedral. Be there. Be there, standing there. If you've never done public witness for something you believed in, November 30th is the night to do it. It's not just for people of faith. It's for people who believe in human rights and for people who know that we got to start bringing the death penalty. We have to get rid of it. You have people who, in effect, are getting their death sentences sitting in a small cell for the rest of their life. Why do we have to condemn people to death? We have a way to keep ourselves safe in society. And I want to invite you to be part of that, to continue the journey. So I began to work. So we begin to organize things like lighting the torch of conscience, where we go to the Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta, light the torch from the eternal flame near Martin Luther King's grave, and gathered together religious leaders from around the country to start standing up. The way you change something in a society is to get people standing up, people of conscience who just stand up and just say, I'm against this. And so we did that. And then we had a long march from Stark Death Row in Florida all the way to the Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta. And then we did theater. We did symbolic presentation. We carried in coffins into Atlanta representing the 82 or whatever people that had been executed in 1990, and came home from that march and had the letter waiting for me from an editor at Random House saying, we want you to write a book and to go up to New York. But you act. And the first action we did was marching, just doing long marches. That's what the civil rights movement did. You know, you can't get media to come if you just say, we're students from the University of San Francisco, and we're against the death penalty. We want to invite y'all to a little press conference, and we're going to serve you refreshments and all. So we're going to be in this room, and we'd just like to talk to you, the media. Would you get the word out that we think the death penalty is wrong, needs to change in California? Would y'all come? Well, they're not going to come, and you know they're not going to come. But what will they come to? If you do a long bicycle ride all around the state of California called Break the Cycle of Violence, if you act, so we did. So this thing with the religious leaders, trying to get them to act, rousing up the people, getting to the people in the pews. And then, of course, the arts happened. Susan Sarandon read the book of Dead Man Walking and came right to me. We had supper together. She called me up. I didn't call her up. She called me up. And I'd heard about her from Amnesty International. She was great on human rights. But I have to go rent Thelma and Louise, see what the lady looks like before she comes to the restaurant. And I wasn't keeping up with movie stars. I didn't know who was who or anything like that. And I followed Gina Davis the whole movie. I thought she was Susan Sarandon, you know? It was pitiful. And I kept liking Louise, and so when Susan walks in the restaurant, I said, thank you, Jesus, she's Louise. I mean, because I like Louise, and Gina Davis kept getting them in more and more trouble with little Brad Pitt, and next thing you know, they're going off the cliff in the movie. I mean, it was sad, And so Susan and I are sitting at a table, and this is how things happen. Two people sit at a table, and they talk, and they say, let's do this. Let's do this. So she said, I know who needs to do this film. His name is Tim Robbins, and so I got to go rent a film, see what he looks like. So I rented Bull Durham. It's sad, they just broke up. And Susan has been getting emails from all over the world. She said, I didn't know the world was going to grieve our separation. But they're both good friends. Somebody sent me an email and said, Helen, who gets custody of you? And I said they both did, because I'm their friend. Tim Robbins has written a play of Dead Man Walking. It's going around schools, high schools and universities, getting drama, getting people close to the issue, and entrusting it over to the young people to do for 10 years. It's called the Dead Man Walking School Theater Project. And he gave it over to the young people because he knows the young people are the ones that are going to have to change this country, going to have to get it about an issue, and have to organize and act to change things. So he's entrusting it. First time a playwright ever did that. He doesn't get a cent from the royalties for this. Gave it over to you to do. And then when the 3 more years of the project are up, he's going to take it back, and then he's going to do the definitive edition of it, and he's going to get it produced commercially. But first it came to you, the young people, to do. And so the arts begin to get in there. We have the movie A Dead Man Walking. Against all odds, a movie of a nun with a death row inmate. And all of the Hollywood studios turned down the Bloomin' movie because they thought it could never have a chance in hell to be a box office success, because they said to Tim, well, if we could, you got the nun. Now, if you let us, spice it up a little bit between that nun and that death row inmate, we might have us a movie. And Tim is saying to them, it's not about spicing it up with the nun and the death row inmate. This is a journey of redemption where he brings you over on both sides of the issue. Everybody thought Tim Robbins, big flaming liberal, it's going to be a movie against the death penalty. He said, Helen, the difference between propaganda and art, propaganda is you stack that film to go in the direction you want it to. You do the crime early on, then it kind of fades how bad it was, what the person did. Then all the sympathy with the person toward the end. You shingling in all those facts about why the death penalty is wrong and racist and costs money and everything. He said, that's propaganda. Everybody expects me to do that. But we're going to bring what art is about. It's just what Faulkner said. Bring people into both parts of their hearts. So Tim in this film, as I do in the book, brings over to the victim side as well. What could heal a family who wake up in the morning and their life is normal, and by the time they go to bed at night, both their son or their daughter has been killed? What could ever restore their life? And of course, what our society says is, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, look at that family, see how they're suffering, they never go see their grandchildren. Their daughter is buried forever. Do justice for them, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Give them the death sentence, because that's the only way to give justice, to heal them, to help them, to honor their dead loved one. That's what our culture says. That's what happened at every one of those trials where the prosecuting attorneys, to put those 700 people you have condemned to death sitting on your death row. And we always have to look into the culture. What's the value here? What's going on here? So anyway, Tim did that in the film. And so he's saying to the movie directors in Hollywood, it's a journey of redemption on both sides, showing the victims' families making their way. And here's the person now moving toward execution who also happens to have a mother, who has brothers, who has siblings. We're going to visit with him for the last time before the state of Louisiana kills him. And they all didn't see it, but one scrappy little film company, Polygram Film International in London, who had done one successful movie, because they did albums, Polygram Film International picked it up. Small budget film, seemed like a lot of money to me, but it was $12.5 million, and told Tim, go for it, we give you freedom to do the film. Just don't preach, Tim, don't preach. But go do your film. And the night of the Academy Awards, Feast of the Annunciation, those of you who are Catholic, March 25th, what an annunciation it was. 1.3 billion people watching. Dead Man Walking got 4 nominations. Bruce Springsteen, he got to sing Dead Man Walking. There's an album with Johnny Cash on it, Bruce Springsteen. Tim Robbins at one point said, I must be out of my mind. I'm doing this musical album along with doing this film. I must be crazy. It's a fantastic album. Eddie Vedder, Pearl Jam, on there with Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, doing this great Pakistani music, and Mary Chapin Carpenter, and Bruce Springsteen. So Bruce Springsteen, the songs nominated, he gets to perform with 1.3 billion people in the world. Whoopi Goldberg was the MC. She introduced Bruce. She said, Bruce, first, you do this Tom Joad series about the people out of work. Then you do about the poor and homeless. And now you've written this book, Dead Man Walking. Bruce, you got to lighten up. And then Sean Penn was nominated for Best Actor. He should have gotten it. And Susan was nominated for Best Actor, Woman Actor. And it was the last thing of the evening. And she'd been nominated 4 other times. She said, there's no greater pressure than to be the front runner. Everybody's saying, oh, Susan, you're going to get it this year. You're going to get it this year. She said, I cannot even drink a glass of wine during this thing because I might be up before 1.3 billion people. And then there it is. We heard it, and it goes to Susan Sarandon. She was breathless when she got up. If you see, you can see this on YouTube or something. I don't know, but you can get it. And it just shows her, like, I want to thank, and the movie went out around the world. It went out around the world. My nephew in Kathmandu with his brother who was serving in the Peace Corps there in Nepal, and they were in Kathmandu walking down a little bitty narrow crooked street, little hole in the wall restaurant, smashed up against the window, a little slate thing, Dead Man Walking tonight. We do what we do, prime principle of the spiritual life. We do what we do for the integrity of it because it's the right thing to do, and we leave the fruits of our efforts. We don't write a book to try to be a famous person and to get a movie made. We write a book because the book needs to be written because we got to take people into a place so that we can help people to wake up of what we've seen and what we know is an injustice. Or we write an op-ed article, or we write a letter to the editor, or we put it in our campus newspaper. We begin to speak from what we know. And so the journey has continued, and I have continued. And the second book, Death of Innocence, talks about 2 innocent people that I accompanied to death. And it's going to break your heart to read these stories. Dobie's story, African-American man, Louisiana, IQ 65. And when you read what the DA did, when you look at what they did with the crime scene, when you know that this man is on trial for his very life, a white woman stabbed in a bathroom in a little town of Manny, Louisiana, and Dobie looks out at the jury of his peers, his impartial and fair jury, and sees an all-white jury sitting there, and no member of any court in the appeals courts or Supreme Court says that's against your constitutional rights, and the legalisms they use to say that. And the second story is Joseph Odell in Virginia. All he was asking for is just to have one complete evidentiary hearing. You know, you have your trial, and then you have a direct appeal to the state Supreme Court. The lawyers wrote one wrong word on the title page for the direct appeal to the state Supreme Court. One wrong word. Instead of petition for appeal, they wrote motion for appeal. And the Supreme Court of Virginia refused even to look, to review what had happened at his trial. When you see the legalism of what is being done in the courts, it is going to sicken you. And so here you have a man on a greased rail and moving toward death. He hadn't even had a direct hearing in a state Supreme Court. If you have no hearing in a state Supreme Court, then there's no fodder for the federal appeals courts to work with. Because what the federal appeals courts do is review what the state has done. So if you got nothing coming up from the state, he can't get a hearing in any federal court, and he is on his way to execution. And Barry Scheck had come on and said, if we could at least just do the DNA on the rape kit, because if you can show that Joseph Odell didn't rape Helen Shartner, there's no felony, you don't have a death sentence, and we can save his life. And Barry Scheck's offering to do the bloody test free. And the state of Virginia does not want the rape kit to have a DNA test. They are on their way toward finality in this case, and they blocked it successfully. And even after Joseph was killed, his widow filed suit to get access to the rape kit, to have the testing posthumously tested, and Virginia destroyed the rape kit and said, this case is closed. We don't need to go back and reopen. Justice was done. They said this on national TV programs. Justice has been done. Why reopen this thing? And we know that we have done justice at each stage in this process. This man has had a long and lengthy appeal, and people don't have a clue about what has happened in this court process. I didn't know anything, and Joseph's killed. But not before. How many people here are Italian? Raise your hand, proudly. Not before, thank you very much, the people of Italy, the Italian parliament, heard about Joseph Odell from the Human Rights Commission, sent a delegation over to see him. The mayor of Palermo, who took on the mafia, Leo Lucas Orlando, comes to visit Joseph, makes him an honorary citizen of Sicily, and says, Joseph, if they kill you, we will bury you at this very special grave. We will ship your body, or we will not let your body be buried in the soil of Virginia in this unjust system. And in the end, folks, that is what happened. They killed Joseph Odell. We accompanied the body, and that's how I got to have a dialogue with the Pope. Everybody, give it a chance, would love to have a direct dialogue with the Pope. I mean, if you're into that kind of thing. Laurie Ayres, who did so much to try to save Joseph's life, the Italian Parliament's bringing her over to Italy to talk and give these talks. They had fax machines set up. They sent 10,000 faxes to the governor of Virginia, who couldn't wait to kill Joseph Odell, get all these Italians off his neck. He's got Mother Teresa calling him. I mean, it's just like, get it over with, get it over with. So Laurie calls me. She said, Helen, sugar, that was her little expression. She said, the Italian Parliament's bringing me over to Italy. I'm going to give talks in these towns. They've set up the fax machines and all. And I'm going to get to see the Pope. And you could come. Helen, you could come because, like, aren't popes and nuns, like, you know, tight? And wouldn't you love to talk to the Pope about the death penalty? I said, are you kidding me? Would I like to talk to the Pope? Of course. But my best friend, Chris, was dying of breast cancer. I said, Laurie, I can't go. She said, well, look, write a letter and we'll deliver it. And I did. See, in Italy, loved the film Dead Man Walking, and it had circulated around in the press of Italy that this Dead Man Walking nun was going to write a letter to the Pope. So it kind of preceded the letter coming. So when Laurie walked into the Secretary of State's office in the Vatican, Monsignor Caccia, who was the assistant, he was a wonderful, kind man. He helped everybody. He said, I understand you have a letter. Yes, I do. Bonk. He takes the letter, bonk, goes right into the lap of the Pope. He said, Helen, he read every word. And it was my chance to pour 14 years of pastoral experience into the Pope's lap. Because, you know, you can have your catechism and you can have your documents and you can have your teachings, but there were a lot of loopholes. And in his encyclical, the Pope had said that the death penalty should be rare, if not non-existent. We have a way to defend society, so we don't have to execute people. But then I read it, my heart dropped, because he said, but in cases of absolute necessity, the state can execute. And I said, Your Holiness, any government that executes is going to claim it's an absolute necessity. And here comes good old Harry Connick Sr., good Catholic VA in New Orleans, who's quoting the Pope, saying we can't get enough death sentences in New Orleans. And so everyone we get's an absolute necessity. I said, your words are being quoted for death. In Kenya, if you have a baby out of wedlock, you can be stoned. And wait till the baby's weaned, dig a hole in the ground, put the young girl in, stone her to death. In Malaysia, you go into the airport, says death penalty for drugs. They claim that's an absolute necessity. Governments can claim anything's an absolute necessity. Terrorism, treason. John Hancock, you know, when he signed that Declaration of Independence, he was putting his life on the line because it was saying to George III, like, we are going to become an independent. That was treason. That was all an act of treason when they signed that Declaration of Independence. We have the nice movies now with the nice soft music, our framers. They were committing an act of treason. They were going against the law. They could have all been killed. It was a capital offense to do treason. And so then I say to him, now I want to make it clear, I am not Catherine of Siena. I didn't go in single-handedly change the mind of the Pope about the death penalty and all that kind of stuff, because dialogue was going on everywhere because of human rights that was in the world. That's what the whole dialogue was, really. Bishops in different countries, people in different countries just saying, what about the death penalty? What about the death penalty? We were in there too, but I was in there too. And that little letter went through that little window right in the week when the Pope had been given the definitive edition of the Catechism to approve. Rubber stamp, put it in Latin, it's the new Catechism. And he said, hold up. And he looked at the part on the death penalty, and he changed a criteria we had used in church teaching for 1,600 years. And the stance of the church was always that the death penalty was to protect society. It was always about self-defense. It was never about vengeance. Never about they killed and we must kill them. But always for extreme or grave crimes, the state has a right to kill. And the Pope cut out 10 words from the Catechism for extreme or grave crimes. Saying that another way, it's saying, if you have a way to keep society safe, no matter how grave or extreme or terrible the crime, we don't kill. He changed it. And that was in 97, and when he came to St. Louis in 99 for the first time, he put the death penalty in with the other pro-life issues. And he stood in St. Louis and he said, no to abortion, no to euthanasia, no to physician-assisted suicide. But all those are issues of innocent life. And that was a question I'd asked. I said, does the Catholic Church only uphold the dignity of innocent life? What about the guilty? And when I'm walking with a man to execution, and he's chained hand and foot, and has guards surrounding him, he's been rendered completely defenseless, and he says to me, Sister, please pray that God holds up my legs. There is no dignity in this death. And so when the Pope's there in St. Louis, and he says, and no to the death penalty, which is cruel and unnecessary, he is the first to recognize that it is torture or cruelty. Our Supreme Court will not because of their legalisms. Same reason that you can allow that the Geneva Conventions don't count for suspected terrorists in Guantanamo. You turn a switch. Thomas Merton said, when the world ends, it'll be legal. You use legal terms and you make torture not torture anymore, not in our books. And so the Pope then says, because it's cruel and unnecessary, because we have a way to keep ourselves safe. And he said, even those among us who have done a terrible crime have a dignity that must not be taken from them. And he changed it. Then the bishops started lining up behind the Pope. First in statements, okay. Good statements are good, pamphlets are good. But now I was just in Nebraska and they said the Catholics are the greatest force going there. You got now, not just the leaders, but see, because the church is always, first and foremost, 99% the people acting. And now we have a movement. There are 65 million people in this country that identify themselves, even if they never step into a church. They got to put down the religious affiliation, they put Catholic, even if they don't practice. That's 65 million people. If we could awaken just those people and get them active, help change this thing. And that's what we're working to do. Not just Catholics, people of faith, people who are wonderful Buddhists who believe in life and the unity of life and never to kill or to hurt any living thing. We all are in this together. And human rights is what holds us all. That we must learn to treat one another with dignity. And let me tell you something. Discourse has never been more important among us, the people, because we see money taking over politics. We see it taking over the media. And it's just us. That happens to be the best definition, working definition of justice that we got. It is just us the people, who begin to work and change things. So I'm going to stop. I'll probably talk longer than you thought I would. We have some time, I think, for conversation together. And here we come. He has an official stance. He delivers a card. Does it have something on it?
It does. I'll read it if that's all right.
Of course. Do you wish to make a statement, or is this a question?
This is a question.
Oh, it's a question. It's your question?
It is. We have several. We're actually going to be taking a few questions from the audience.
Yeah, feel free to go if you got to go.
So
obviously, we see the people leaving. Go ahead.
So if you have a question card, you can put your hand up and someone will come around with a basket to collect.
You did that really well. And you look really good, too.
As do you, sister.
Did you wear a tie just for this occasion to read the questions?
I did.
Oh, wow. Great. What's your name?
My name is Bobby.
Okay, great, Bobby. Go to it.
All right. Sister, your first-hand experience of the death penalty ignited your passion on this issue. If more people were to have a personal experience with the process or an inmate on death row, how would this affect the debate surrounding the abolition of the death penalty?
It would change everything because it's easy to kill a monster, but it's hard to kill a real human being. And people are worth more than the worst act of their life. Personal involvement's everything. They will block, and California was one of the first states to try to make executions public, and they blocked it. It's a secret ritual. And that's why those of us who have been in there and gotten involved personally tell the story. It would change everything. And short of getting in there, we have to do art, drama, to bring people as close as we can so they can deal with that visceral issue of their hearts, you know, that conflict in their hearts about outrage over a crime, yes, but then what are we going to do about it? And does it really heal a victim's family? To ask them to wait 15 and 20 years, to be called in to sit on the front row, watch as the state kills the one who killed their loved one. Bobby, we're rolling here. What you got next?
All right. Next up, during your journey with your first death row inmate, you encountered widespread opposition by people of the Catholic Church, including the Archbishop you mentioned. Do you often struggle with your political ideals and the political stances of the Catholic Church?
The Catholic Church is, we learn this in Vatican II, is first and foremost the people. So we're with the people. And yes, belonging to the Catholic Church means there's a wisdom tradition of teachings that we can draw on, like Catholic social teaching. It was one of the first in Rerum Novarum to stand for people in labor and the right to strike, to stand with people and to work for the common good of all. There's a lot of wisdom in the teachings of the Catholic Church and in the leaders as well. But finally, it's up to us, the people, to live the gospel. So it's both. Doing very well. Did you kind of comb through those to try to get a new one? Because you have different colors there. This is a blue one.
Yeah, they're not color-coded.
Oh, they're not?
No.
I knew you were organized, though, when you came up. I didn't know. Maybe the blue stood for something, yeah?
Yeah, blue was my favorite. That's why I
Blue
used
was your
that one.
favorite? Yeah, look at that. Man in blue. It's great, huh? Okay, go, Bobby.
Next question. What would your response or advice be to victims' families who might feel as though the death penalty brings them closure?
Nothing. I'm not the one to give advice to victims' families. I haven't had a loved one killed. I would introduce them to other victims' families who will be the ones to accompany them. And just know this, that we are beginning to see a dramatic diminishment in the practice of the death penalty in this country. The fact that you have not executed somebody in a long time, the fact that you really do not execute people that much. You got 700 on death row. You killed, what, 23 people? That's too many. We shouldn't kill anybody. But the victim's family and their voices are the ones that are changing this. Who, like in New Jersey, 62 victims' families came to those legislative hearings and said, don't kill for us. So the first thing I would do, like if a victim's family says, I hate this person, I want to kill him with my own hands, I say to them, if I had somebody who killed my loved one, I could be saying just what you're saying. But why don't you talk to so-and-so? They've been through this trauma and they've been through this loss. And perhaps you all could help each other. So I don't give advice to victims' families. I'm not the one to give advice.
Final question. What can one single California resident do to engage in abolishing the death penalty?
One single California resident, married ones too, can do what any person of conscience does on any social issue. You put your personal signature and join into efforts that are working to change it. By doing that, you formally enter into the resistance to injustice. Until you have done some action, thus far in your life, you have been silent about it and you've been complicit and your name's on the gurney when anybody's killed, because we're a democracy. And you join with groups that are working for change. It's the way we work to abolish slavery. It's the way the women got the vote. It's the way we change anything. Citizens begin to be active. One of the big things we struggle with is powerlessness. We feel, well, who am I? One person in this great big crashing wave. But we are an individual with a conscience, and just read history and see people who stood up, people of conscience, to say we're going to change this. And Goethe, and I'll end with this, it sustains me. He said that when we are passionately committed to a cause and unswerving in that commitment, providence moves for us and resources make their way to us. And we are going to find out we're not alone. And so then we begin to act. If you've never done anything, November 30th, the cathedral is going to be lit as part of Cities for Life around the world. Thousands of cities around the world, in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, are going to be lit up. And you're going to be part of a global movement for human rights to end the death penalty. And so I want to reissue that invitation. I will be over there at the books and be glad to sign them for you. You could get both books for $25. It helps our efforts to end the death penalty. I don't take the money and go to the Bahamas. It's to help end the death penalty for you. Both books $25, one of the books $15. Thank you.